Let me ask you something. When was the last time you truly examined the people you allow into your life? Not just acquaintances or coworkers, but those closest to your inner world. The ones who influence how you think, how you feel, and how you act when no one else is watching. It's easy to underestimate the impact of our social circle. But what if I told you that many of your inner battles, the doubt, the fatigue, the subtle frustration, aren't entirely yours? What if they're a reflection of the minds you're surrounded by? Epictetus once said, "The key is to keep company only with people who uplift you, whose presence calls forth your best." And that's not just poetic wisdom, it's survival for your peace, your clarity, your strength. This video is not about judging others, it's about protecting yourself, because the truth is simple but uncomfortable. You cannot build an iron mind while holding on to people who are chipping away at your foundation. You may think you're strong enough to rise above it, but even the strongest soul begins to bend when surrounded by voices that normalize fear, drama, or self-pity. Slowly, without realizing it, you start to carry what isn't yours. Today, we're going to talk about 7 types of people you should not befriend, not out of pride, not out of cruelty, but out of self-respect. These are the people who quietly pull you off course, who plant seeds of chaos in the soil where you're trying to grow virtue. People who challenge not your ego, but your emotional discipline, your peace, and your purpose. This isn't just a list, it's a reminder that who you let in matters, that silence is sometimes the greatest form of wisdom, and that you don't have to carry people who are content with staying broken. So if you've ever felt drained after a conversation, confused after a so-called friendship, or uneasy around someone you can't fully explain, this video might give you the clarity you've been needing. Because the Stoic path is not about walking alone, it's about walking with intention. You're not here to please the world, you're here to build yourself, quietly, relentlessly, and the people around you will either help you rise or hold you down just enough to make you forget you're meant to fly. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Complainer. Poison in Small Doses. There's a kind of person whose presence feels harmless at first, maybe even familiar. They don't yell. They don't attack. They simply speak in tones of disappointment, in rhythms of defeat. They are the complainer. You know the one. They walk into a room and the air changes, not in thunderclaps or chaos, but in sighs and subtle shadows. Everything is just slightly wrong for them. The weather, their boss, the news, the world, their life. And while they're not asking you to fix it, they're certainly asking you to sit with it, to carry it, to absorb it. But here's the danger. Their voice can slowly become your inner voice. Their worldview, bleak, resigned, hopeless, can slip into yours without you realizing. Because complaining is contagious, not because of what it says, but because of what it trains your mind to expect. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The things you think about determine the quality of your mind. Your soul takes on the color of your thoughts." And when you're constantly surrounded by those who bathe everything in bitterness, your soul, your thoughts, take on that same hue. Let me ask you something. Have you ever walked away from a conversation and felt more tired than before it started? Not because it was long, but because it drained something deeper in you. Your optimism, your focus, your will to act. That's not coincidence. That's exposure, and exposure shapes you, whether you consent to it or not. The Stoics believe that what matters most is not what happens to us, but how we choose to respond. Epictetus put it simply, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. The complainer, by contrast, surrenders their agency. They narrate their life as if they're a victim of everything and a participant in nothing. And worse, they invite you into that same powerless space. But you are not powerless. You are not here to echo complaints. You are here to build clarity, direction, and strength. And those things cannot survive in an environment soaked in negativity. The truth is, complaining is not about processing pain. It's about rehearsing it over and over. With no intention to grow, no desire to change, just a craving to dwell in it and to pull others in. I remember a man I used to work with. Let's call him David. He was kind, thoughtful. But every day, like clockwork, he'd find something to unload. How management was unfair, how the system was rigged, how nothing ever worked. At first, I listened, out of empathy, then out of habit. But slowly, his complaints began to shape my own expectations. I'd walk into work already bracing for what would go wrong. That's when I knew I wasn't just hearing his story. I was starting to live it, and I had to make a choice. Not a dramatic one, just a quiet, disciplined one. I stepped back. Not in anger, in self-respect. You may not be able to remove every complainer from your life, but you can control the energy you absorb. You can set emotional boundaries. You can choose not to echo their despair in your own thoughts. Because the more you make space for peace, the more your mind begins to crave clarity instead of conflict. There's a stoic practice here worth remembering. When someone begins to complain, practice holding your silence, not to be rude, but to remind yourself that not every burden needs to be shared. Not every reaction is required. Not every conversation deserves your full emotional presence. That kind of restraint, that quiet discipline, is a form of inner strength the Stoics held sacred. And here's something powerful. When you stop feeding the complainer with your attention, you begin to starve the pattern. Not in them, but in you. You stop validating your own excuses. You stop making space for helplessness. And you start taking responsibility for how you choose to feel. Because you are not here to suffer passively through life. You are here to master it quietly, steadily, deliberately. So ask yourself this: who do I allow into my mind each day? Who is speaking into my focus, my beliefs, my pace? And are they lifting me or latching on to me? That's not judgment. That's discernment. And discernment is how you protect the most valuable thing you have, your mind. If you truly want to build an iron mind, you must become fiercely selective about the words, the thoughts, and the people you allow to take root within you. Because peace is not just about the absence of conflict. It's about choosing the voices you allow to shape your silence. And sometimes, the most courageous thing you can do is walk away, not in anger, but in clarity. Chapter 2. The Excuse Maker, the Enemy of Responsibility. You've heard them before. I would, but it's just not the right time. I could, if things were different. I tried, but you know how the world is. At first, these words sound harmless, understandable even. Life is hard, circumstances are real, but when you listen a little longer, when you pay closer attention, you'll begin to see the truth beneath the surface. You're not just hearing hesitation, you're hearing avoidance. You're witnessing someone who has made an art of sidestepping responsibility. The excuse maker doesn't raise their voice. They don't argue. They simply wear down the edges of effort with the gentle weight of reasons. Reasons why they couldn't change, couldn't act, couldn't rise. But here's the danger. If you're not careful, their excuses start sounding a lot like your own. Seneca warned us, it is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. And what's the greatest thief of time? Excuses. Dressed up as logic, disguised as realism, delivered as casual conversation. The Stoics believe that your life is your responsibility, not your environment, not your past. Not even your emotions, just you, your choices, your responses, your will. Let that settle for a moment. Because if you truly absorb that, your world begins to shift. Let me tell you a story. Years ago, I knew someone, let's call him Adam. Brilliant mind, strong ideas, big dreams. Every time we spoke, he had a vision for something better, a new project, a business idea, a lifestyle change, but with every idea came a reason to wait. This month's too busy. Maybe next year when I have more savings. Honestly, I just don't have the energy right now. The problem wasn't the lack of opportunity. It was the habit of hesitation. Months passed, then years. Nothing moved, not because the world stopped him, but because his belief that the world had to be perfect before he could begin was the very thing that held him hostage. And you've probably felt that yourself. That subtle voice that says, maybe later. That quiet delay that feels safe, but costs you something more valuable than time, momentum. Epictetus wrote, "Don't explain your philosophy. Embody it." Excuse makers explain everything. They rationalize delay. They intellectualize inaction. But you're meant to live differently, because you weren't made for a life of pause. You were built for movement, for mastery, and no mastery begins in comfort. But here's what you need to understand. Excuses don't just affect the one who speaks them. They influence the people who hear them. If you surround yourself with those who constantly lower the bar for themselves, you may begin to question why you hold your standards so high. Have you ever had someone say, "You're too hard on yourself," when in reality, you were finally stepping into your own discipline? That's how it begins, the erosion of your fire, and you must protect it. Because the moment you start to believe that effort is optional, that discipline is negotiable, you begin to drift. The Stoics didn't tolerate excuses, not because they were harsh, but because they believed deeply in your potential. They knew that strength was not about controlling the world, but about controlling your response to it. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That power begins the moment you stop waiting for perfect conditions and start acting in imperfect ones. It begins when you look yourself in the mirror and say, "It's on me." All of it, the effort, the change, the outcome. And no, it's not always fair, but fairness was never the promise. Freedom was. The freedom that comes when you own your life, every piece of it. So take a breath right now. Ask yourself, what have I been putting off? What story have I been repeating that's keeping me stuck? And more importantly, who's been whispering in my ear that it's okay to keep waiting? Because your time is too valuable, your mind is too sharp, and your soul is too awake to let excuses lead the way. You don't need more time, you need more truth. And the truth is, the life you want won't wait for better timing. It begins the moment you stop making excuses and start making moves. Chapter 3. The Manipulator. Guilt as a weapon. Some people don't need to raise their voice to control you. They don't demand, they don't force, they simply speak softly, planting guilt like a seed, and wait for you to water it with self-doubt. This is the quiet power of the manipulator. They don't need chaos to dominate your mind. They only need one thing, your empathy turned inward against yourself. At first, it feels like you're just being kind, being thoughtful, being supportive. But over time, you begin to notice a pattern, how you feel after every interaction, a subtle weight, a sense of obligation, a growing discomfort with saying no, and then you realize it's not you who's freely giving, it's them who's slowly taking. The Stoics warned us about this. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If someone is able to show me that what I think or do is not right, I will happily change. For I seek the truth, by which no one was ever truly harmed. But manipulators don't offer truth. They offer distortion, wrapped in flattery, or worse, in emotional debt. They tell you what you want to hear until you feel you owe them something for their kindness. They hint at disappointment when you assert yourself. They make your peace feel selfish, your boundaries feel cruel. But here's what you must remember. Boundaries are not a betrayal. They are a declaration of self-respect, of inner order, of emotional clarity. You do not exist to soothe someone else's instability. Have you ever felt guilty for putting yourself first? For saying no, not because you didn't care, but because you needed space to breathe? That guilt, quiet, persistent, heavy, is their tool. It's how the manipulator keeps you within reach without ever appearing forceful. I remember a woman, let's call her Eva. She had a friend who always needed her for everything, a ride here, a favor there. Emotional support at all hours. And when Eva finally tried to take a step back, her friend said, "I just never thought you'd be the type to abandon people." That sentence lived in Eva's mind for weeks. Not because it was true, but because it was designed to pierce through her empathy. Epictetus taught, no person is free who is not master of themselves, and that includes mastery over your emotional triggers, especially guilt. You may care deeply, you may want to be there for people, but manipulation hides inside that kindness. The manipulator isn't interested in who you truly are. They're interested in what you're willing to give, even when it hurts you. So here's a truth you may need to hear today. You are not selfish for protecting your peace. You are not cruel for wanting clarity. You are not wrong for saying this is not okay, because love, real love, is not a leash. It doesn't demand. It doesn't guilt. It doesn't twist your compassion into compliance. The Stoic approach is simple but powerful. Pay attention to how people make you feel after a conversation, not just what they said, but what they left inside your mind. Do you feel empowered or subtly indebted, lighter, or somehow responsible for fixing their mood? If you consistently feel uneasy, it's not accidental. And it's not your job to fix it. Marcus Aurelius reminds us, the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. In other words, don't mirror manipulation with resentment. Don't engage in emotional games. Simply step back, calmly, quietly, with conviction. Because the one thing a manipulator cannot control is your ability to detach, to walk away, not in anger, but in strength. You don't need to explain yourself. You don't need to apologize for doing what's healthy, and you certainly don't need to shrink your spirit just to keep someone else from feeling abandoned. Remember this, if someone truly values you, they will respect your boundaries, they will honor your time, and they will never use guilt to keep you close. But if they can't, then it's time to release their hold, not for revenge, but for freedom. You are not here to live under someone else's emotional leverage. You are here to walk your path with clarity, with courage, and with a mind that bows only to reason, not manipulation. So ask yourself today, whose voice have you mistaken for care when it was only control? And what would your life feel like if that voice was no longer echoing inside you? Chapter 4. The drama magnet, a storm that isn't yours. You know this person. They always seem to be in the middle of something, a fight, a misunderstanding, a crisis that somehow always finds them. And for some reason, they want you to be a part of it, not because you caused it, not because you can fix it, but because your presence gives their chaos more energy. This is the drama magnet. And if you're not careful, their storm becomes yours. At first, it feels innocent. They just need someone to vent to. Then it's just a little help navigating a situation. But soon, you're fielding late-night calls, defending them in conversations you weren't part of, and holding space for emotions that were never yours to begin with. And slowly, almost without realizing it, your own peace begins to shrink. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." But when you're entangled with a drama magnet, you surrender that power, not with a single act, but with dozens of little reactions. Their moods become your weather. Their urgency becomes your responsibility. But let's be honest, you didn't sign up for this storm. The Stoics believed in emotional discipline, not emotional absorption. They didn't see detachment as cold or uncaring. They saw it as wise. Because the mind must be guarded, not against physical threats, but against the turbulence of those who cannot manage their own lives. Let me ask you something real. Have you ever noticed how your day feels after just one chaotic interaction with someone who thrives on conflict? Not a disagreement, but someone who lives off escalation, the kind of person who can take a small issue and turn it into a theatrical event. A delay becomes an insult. A missed call becomes betrayal. Everything is exaggerated because without intensity, they don't know how to feel real. And you start to walk on eggshells. Not because you're afraid, but because you're exhausted. You begin to shape your reactions around their volatility. That's the cost, not drama, not noise, but the erosion of your own calm. Seneca warned, "A man is as miserable as he thinks he is." And drama magnets are convinced they are always under attack, always misunderstood, always the victim. They live in misery, and if you're close to them, they expect you to live there too. But you don't have to, because their story isn't your story, their pain isn't your burden, their storm isn't your home. The Stoic path is not to fix every person you meet. It's to remain steady while the world wavers. And sometimes that means loving someone from a distance, or stepping back when their chaos threatens the balance you've fought so hard to create. I knew someone like this once. Every week was a new crisis, a new enemy, a new situation that required my attention. And because I cared, I kept showing up, I kept trying to help, but over time I noticed something troubling. The drama never stopped, because it wasn't about the situation, it was about the attention, it was about needing to feel alive through conflict. And I had to make a choice, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. I chose peace, not just in my schedule, in my mind. Here's the truth you may need to hear. You are not a sponge for someone else's instability. You don't owe anyone your energy just because they're loud about their suffering. And you are not selfish for protecting your inner world. Drama thrives on reaction. When you stop reacting, it starts to lose power. Epictetus said it best. When someone is properly grounded in life, they shouldn't have to look outside themselves for approval. The same is true for emotional regulation. A grounded person doesn't outsource their peace or their pain. So ask yourself, do the people in your life bring storms that aren't yours? And if so, why are you still standing in the rain? Sometimes, wisdom isn't about giving the perfect response. Sometimes it's about giving no response at all. Just silence. Just space. Just the quiet courage to walk away. You weren't made for drama. You were made for depth, and depth begins where noise ends. Chapter 5. The Gossip. Words that rot character. Not all poison comes in shouts. Sometimes it comes in whispers, softly spoken, carefully disguised. But it's poison all the same. You've heard it before. Did you hear what she did? I don't want to judge, but I'm only telling you this because I thought you should know. At first, gossip seems harmless, almost bonding. It makes you feel included on the inside of something secret. But that feeling comes at a cost, one you may not notice until it's too late. Because gossip doesn't just shape your view of others, it begins to shape your view of yourself. Marcus Aurelius once warned, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." And yet, when you spend your energy talking about who others are or what they've done, you step away from your own path. You stop building your character and start chipping away at theirs. But here's what's even more dangerous. If someone gossips to you, they will gossip about you, not out of malice, out of habit. Because gossip isn't about truth, it's about distraction. It's about filling silence with something easier than self-reflection. Let me ask you something honest. Have you ever walked away from a conversation and felt off? Like something about what was said didn't sit right with you? That's not just discomfort. That's your inner integrity signaling that your values were just compromised, even slightly. And those small compromises add up. Not all at once, but day by day, word by word, until the tone of your inner voice starts to shift. The Stoics taught that your mind is a garden. Every word you speak, every thought you entertain, is a seed. Gossip plants weeds, quick to grow, hard to remove, and stealing life from the deeper roots of wisdom and virtue. Seneca said, "Associate with people who are likely to improve you. Welcome those whom you are capable of improving." But gossipers don't improve anyone. They create a culture of suspicion, a mindset of quiet judgment, and an atmosphere where no one feels truly safe. I once knew someone who had a gift for storytelling, but over time I realized their stories always had one thing in common. They weren't theirs to tell. They knew everyone's secrets, and in sharing them, they'd draw people closer, but only temporarily, because eventually, trust evaporated. People laughed along, but they never really opened up, because deep down, everyone feared being next. And that's the heart of it. Gossip erodes trust slowly, quietly, and completely. So what do? You practice silence, not out of fear, out of discipline. You steer conversations toward things that build, not break. And when gossip rises, you don't fight it. You let it fall to the floor of your quiet indifference. Epictetus said, "If anyone tells you that a certain person speaks ill of you, do not make excuses about what is said of you, but answer, 'He was ignorant of my other faults, else he would not have mentioned these alone.'" That's the Stoic way. Calm, clear, unbothered. Because you were not made to live in whispers. You were made to live in truth. And truth doesn't need a crowd. It only needs a conscience. Ask yourself now, are you feeding conversations that you wouldn't want to be a part of if you weren't in the room? Are you staying close to voices that invite you to judge when you could be surrounded by minds that invite you to grow? You're allowed to walk away, not because you're better than them, but because you're building something quieter, stronger, something called integrity. And integrity is not loud. It's not performative. It's built in private, in the words you refuse to speak, in the silence you protect, in the way you show up when no one else is watching. Gossip may feel good in the moment, but your peace, your clarity, your character, that lasts. Choose them every time. Chapter 6. The Envious. Shadow over your light. There's a kind of silence that feels louder than words. It's the silence you hear when you share something joyful, an achievement, a breakthrough, a small victory, and the other person doesn't smile, doesn't celebrate, doesn't really see you. They nod, they say the right thing. But something in the air turns cold, distant, as if your light has become a burden to them. This is envy. And if you don't recognize it, it can begin to wrap itself around you like a shadow. Epictetus said, "Wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants. But the envious person lives in constant want. Not just for more, but for what others have. They don't just measure their life by their own progress, they measure it by yours. And the moment you rise, they feel left behind." Let's speak honestly. You've probably encountered this before. Maybe you worked hard for something, a promotion, a new habit, a healthier way of living, and someone close to you responded not with pride, but with subtle resistance. A sarcastic remark, a lukewarm compliment, a joke that didn't really feel like a joke, and suddenly you found yourself shrinking, dimming your excitement, downplaying your progress to make them more comfortable. But why? Because somewhere deep down, you feared that your growth might cost you their closeness. And that's what envy does. It punishes progress, not openly, not aggressively, but passively, quietly, through emotional withdrawal or lukewarm support. And if you're not careful, you begin to self-sabotage, not because you lack the drive, but because you don't want to outgrow the people around you. Marcus Aurelius reminds us, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." But envy contaminates those thoughts. Not because you envy others, but because others quietly resent you for evolving. And that resentment can twist your sense of direction. I knew someone like that once. Every time something good happened in my life, I noticed they'd go silent, or they'd find a way to change the subject. At first, I ignored it. I thought maybe they were just going through something, but over time I began to notice the pattern. My joy became a threat. My drive became a mirror they didn't want to face, and I had to ask myself, is their presence helping me grow, or making me second-guess who I'm becoming? The Stoics valued clarity. They didn't ask you to judge people, but to observe, not with bitterness, but with discernment. Because envy isn't about you, it's about the parts of others that feel unfulfilled, unloved, or unseen, but their healing is not your burden. Your job is not to stay small so someone else can feel comfortable. Seneca once said, "As is a tale, so is life. Not how long it is, but how good it is what matters." And a good life is not one lived under the shadow of other people's insecurities. It is a life lived boldly, but humbly, with purpose, with discipline, and yes, with boundaries. So here's the truth. You're allowed to shine. You're allowed to be proud of how far you've come. You're allowed to walk forward, even if someone else chooses to stand still. Because if your light disturbs their darkness, that is their mirror to face, not your flame to dim. Ask yourself now, have you been holding back just to stay acceptable to someone who's unwilling to grow with you? Have you started making yourself small in rooms where you should be expanding? The Stoic path isn't loud, it isn't boastful, but it is steady. And it doesn't apologize for growth. It embraces it, honors it, protects it. So walk forward. Let go of those who turn cold when you rise, not out of anger, but out of reverence for the person you're becoming. Because your light was never meant to be hidden. It was meant to lead. Chapter 7. The victim, prisoner of their own mind. There's a kind of suffering that becomes seductive. It doesn't scream, it doesn't lash out. It quietly repeats one message. This isn't my fault. I have no choice. The world is against me. This is the voice of the victim, not the person who's been hurt. We've all been there. But the person who clings to the hurt as identity, who chooses helplessness over healing, who wraps themselves in self-pity and calls it truth. And if you're not careful, their mindset can start becoming your own. Epictetus wrote, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." But the victim refuses that truth, because if you have the power to respond, then you have responsibility. And responsibility is heavy. It requires effort. It demands that you stand even when everything in you wants to fall. The victim mindset offers an escape from action, from accountability, from growth. But that escape is a prison in disguise, one where the bars aren't made of steel, but of stories. Stories about how unfair life is, how nothing ever changes, how it's always someone else's fault. You may have someone like this in your life, someone who always has a reason why things aren't working out, who blames their childhood, their boss, their partner, their luck. And when you offer encouragement, they call it naive. When you suggest a solution, they say you don't understand. And maybe, out of compassion, you try to carry their pain. You give advice. You show up, you try to fix, but over time you start to feel heavy yourself. You begin to wonder if your effort even matters, because the truth is, you can't walk for someone who refuses to stand. I remember someone I used to know. Let's call him Ben. Smart, talented, but always defeated. Every job he lost was someone else's politics. Every relationship that ended was someone else's fault. And every opportunity missed was due to bad timing, bad luck, or bad people. At first, I tried to help. I listened. I coached. I encouraged. But no matter what I offered, the outcome was the same. He returned to his story. A story where he was powerless, where change was impossible, where life happened to him, never through him. Marcus Aurelius reminds us, you have power over your mind, not outside events. And that's the great dividing line. Victims obsess over what's outside. The Stoic trains what's within. So here's what you need to ask yourself. Are you holding space for someone who refuses to grow? And in doing so, are you slowly shrinking? Because if you surround yourself with victim energy long enough, you may start seeing your own life through that same fog. You begin to forget how strong you are, how capable, how sovereign. You begin to internalize the lie that your circumstances define you, when in truth, it's your choices that always will. Seneca wrote, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." Adversity isn't the enemy. Avoiding it is. And the victim doesn't just avoid adversity, they avoid ownership. And over time, that avoidance becomes contagious. You have to protect your mind, not just from external chaos, but from internal resignation. You must draw a quiet line in the sand. A boundary that says, I will support, but I will not be consumed. I will walk with you, but I will not carry you. Because your peace matters, your progress matters, and most of all, your example matters. The Stoic doesn't reject the wounded, but they refuse to become wounded by choice. So ask yourself now, are you being pulled into someone else's helplessness? Are you walking through life as if it's happening to you, or as if you are shaping it, moment by moment? Victimhood is not your path. It never was. You were meant to rise, not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. And the first step, stop giving your strength to people who choose weakness, not in judgment, but in protection of the life you're here to live. Because you don't need sympathy, you need sovereignty, and that begins today. Conclusion. You've seen them. The complainer, the excuse maker, the manipulator, the drama magnet, the gossip, the envious, the victim. They don't always show up with bad intentions, but they come with something far more dangerous, a mindset that chips away at yours. And if you're not careful, if you don't draw the line, you'll find yourself carrying burdens that were never yours to begin with. You'll find your peace eroding, your clarity dimming, your progress slowing, not because of who you are, but because of who you've allowed near. Marcus Aurelius said, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." But your thoughts are shaped by your environment, and your environment is shaped by the people you let in. So here's your invitation: choose wisely. Step away from the noise that weakens your discipline. Walk toward the silence that strengthens your mind. You don't need chaos to feel alive. You don't need guilt to feel connected. You don't need to carry others to prove you're good. You just need to be anchored. Clear, steady. And if this video spoke to something inside you, something you've been feeling but maybe couldn't name, I invite you to join a space where your strength is not only protected but sharpened. Subscribe to the Stoic Philosophy right now, because this isn't just a channel, it's a refuge, a reminder, a compass for when the world pulls you in every direction but inward. Every week, we bring you ancient wisdom for modern strength. No hype, no noise, just the timeless clarity you were always meant to walk with. So hit subscribe, tap the bell, and remember, you are not here to be drained. You are here to rise, quietly, purposefully, and with discipline. Welcome to your circle of clarity. Welcome to the Stoic Philosophy.